Hello and welcome to our special edition of Processing the Process, featuring both of our artists, Jonathan Riddell,
Hello.
choreographer and artistic director of Riddell Dance Theater, and Allie K. Dakers, teacher, actor, producer, and director of her middle school drama club. We've been following Jonathan and Allie's process as manifested in many different creative ventures. Over the next couple of videocasts, Jonathan and Allie will compare and contrast their respective experiences, both internal and external, during the course of their professional careers. We'll focus on dynamics that we've begun to explore individually, but will now flesh out collectively. So, the first category that we're going to discuss is the emergence of the young artists and their early influences. Now, John and Allie both attended Rye High School in Rye, New York, albeit 3 years apart.
Go Garnets.
Total coincidence.
I know,
Yeah.
total coincidence. And they were both active in Rye High's theater program. Now, both artists were interested in multiple creative genres even back then, but ultimately, Jonathan chose to pursue dance, and Allie studied acting, directing, and playwriting. So, what factors drove each of you to make those choices?
Well, for me, it was opportunity. I was, dabbling in various arts, as you just said, and dance sort of seemed like something I could grasp onto quite quickly. I took to it quite quickly, and I got a lot of sort of positive support, a lot of great comments and encouragement to head in that direction. And I just was sort of open and eager and wide-eyed to whatever would sort of get me onto a stage and get me working and creating. And so I went, great, dance, cool. I wish there were a more glamorous reason, but it kind of was, again, opportunity and ego fueled, I think.
I love it. Does that sound familiar, Al?
A little bit, yeah. With regard to why I ended up in theatrical arts, there were so many facets that kind of come together in the theatrical arts. I mean, they come together in dance too. A fully produced show encompasses a ton of elements. But in an educational setting, as a student, it kind of was all happening right now in front of my face. I love painting, I love sculpting, I love drawing, I also love building. I love all of these different things in addition to the acting side of it, the bringing characters and stories to life. So for me, it was kind of all of that, plus the physicality, the energy of groups working together on these things. I just kind of fell into the community aspect of that.
Yeah.
And on top of everything, all of these elements of the arts are coming together in one playing field, so to speak. So for me, that's kind of why I chose the theatrical path.
Yeah.
That's exciting. And some of these things were actually, I think, what attracted you as well, John, even though you went on into dance, but from a theater standpoint.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I always loved theater. I never lost that love, in music and film and everything I was dabbling in. I took a dance path. Again, I don't know if I was specifically conscious of it at the time, but what was a benefit in it was I went very deep in one specific area for a while.
Right.
And I learned a lot about art in general, in one specific medium very deeply. What sort of kept gnawing at me, though, was my love for the everything else and the breadth and the ability to incorporate music and acting into a production, which typically you don't do in dance. I mean, there are certainly examples of it all over the place, but not quite to the degree that when you put on a play, for example, there's much more of that integration going on. And a lot of the dance I then was excited about had more of that in there. And certainly now what I'm doing is branching out and trying to cultivate my love for these other mediums.
Exactly, and we'll be exploring that very issue of breadth and depth of exploration a little bit further down the line. But for the moment, we're going to move on to our next area, which is that both Allie and John have cited several key people in their lives who have served as, who have had tremendous influence and who have inspired them through the course of the early stages of their artistic development. Can you discuss the roles of these mentors on your process and your choices early on?
Sure.
You're next.
Well, it starts, I think, with family. Those are your closest
Absolutely.
first
Yes.
influencers, if you will. For my mom, she was, still is very playful, very silly, a very confident woman in how she carries herself through the world. We used to play with accents. We used to tell stories and sing and all of these things all the time. And then in high school, Neil Mendick, my English teacher, theater teacher, pretty fantastic. He really helped me kind of embrace more of like that thoughtful expression and like how deep can we take this, and also the language itself. How can we use language in addition to all of the other facets of theatrical storytelling? Having this higher purpose or an impact, and the analytical side of the use of language when you put it in the context of a performance or of a play. Then college for me, I have two main people in college. John Gorsak, he really helped build the foundation of technique for me. My Meisner technique, not mine, of course, Sanford's, but clarify. But all of the elements that I use with my kids, with my students, with adults that come from that technique really were put there through the work that I did with John. Delving deeper in characterization, and specifically for my directing work, like how do you really I'm an actor's director. I always wanted to be. I would take acting courses, post college in the city, not so much to pound the pavement and become an actor per se. It was so that I was well informed on how to work with actors. So John also kind of instilled that, the importance of understanding that side of that director's chair, what that is. And then Claude Feil, another college professor, he was the comedy guy. He was the guy that reminded me that we're playing here, leap and the net will appear, all of that kind of stuff, playing with timing and just reminding everybody in the room like why we're all here. This is to tell a story. This is to have fun. This is to lift our hearts. So.
Yeah. I mean, family for me was very important.
Yes.
They are very important. They're still around. But really, I mean, definitely my parents. My father was an architect, and my mother was just an artist all around, constantly creating. She sewed costumes for everybody's productions, and very well. Like they were gorgeous, and just constantly had me doing arts and crafts of some kind. My brothers and sisters were the more performing artists. My brother is still in the theater. He's a theater professor. And my sister was a dancer. And I just, from when I was tiny, was watching them on stage and doing great, beautiful things. And for years, though, for much of my growing upness, I was too intimidated to follow in their footsteps. I think I greatly admired them, but I mean, I didn't really step into those shoes until later in high school. So I always did it off to the side and in the background as a kid. Though they always roped me into things, and like my brother would play with accents with me and things like that. At one point, he even was doing an off-Broadway show in the city, and they needed a child voice actor to just do a recorded segment that they would play during the play, and he kind of tricked me into doing it. Like, we were just having a fun day in the city together, and all of a sudden the whole day he started talking in this accent, and he's like, hey, why don't you practice this accent with me? And so then all day we were talking in this southern accent, and then he's like, hey, that's coming pretty well. Why don't you come over with me to my friend's house, who was the director of the show? And then the next thing I know, the script was in front of me, and they're like, why don't you read this stuff? You know, I think by that point he kind of explained to me what was going on, but it was this total like, he just kind of was teaching me / auditioning me / coaching me to get ready to then do this thing. And then the next thing I knew, my voice was in this production, which was a totally inappropriate production for a child to see, but it was about stuff that I'm not going to talk about right now. But there I was, this child, like, oh, and I'm watching this show and hearing my voice, and there's all this adult content going on. And I say inappropriate, and yet it was totally appropriate, because I was exposed to all sorts of crazy stuff like that when I was a kid, and why not? Why not? We can handle it. We can handle it. So family, yeah, very important. High school, absolutely Neil Mendick. It's interesting. For me, my experience with him and the influence he had on me was so much just the freedom. He, in the classes I didn't have so many classes with him as it sounds like you did, but the few that I did, it was very much just about like, well, here's the script and go and run with it and follow your instincts, and it was very much about like the play, the playfulness for us, and so and just the mere fact that in a very academic focused environment, there was then this time to play and just explore art and music and songs and drama. It was just so liberating. So thank you. But I gotta also mention 2 of my English teachers, because what they taught me about writing has always influenced my art, no matter what that art has been. So one of my teachers, Mr. Kelly, had this absolutely diabolical assignment. I don't know if you went through that assignment too, but it was this writing assignment. It lasted at least a semester, or if not, or a quarter, I can't remember. It lasted a big chunk of time. But we had to hand in all these assignments, and then he would grade you, and you were allowed unlimited rewrites, and then he would keep grading you, and your grade would either go down if your rewrites got worse, or they would get better, and it was totally up to you what you wanted to bring your grade up to, but you had to earn it, and you had to, and you decided when you were done with that paper and was ready to move on to the next. Wow. And so you really earned your grade, but at the same time I learned everything about editing, and to this day, to realize that I learned it back then, appreciated it, but man, do I appreciate it now. Because I use it in my choreography, I use it in my songwriting, I use it in everything. And also Miss Grummett, who's no longer with us, I'm so sad to know that, but her encouragement in me creatively, again, at a time where I was so just closed in and just so worried about, fitting in and everything, for her to, she kind of latched on to some poetry I was writing, and she just kept encouraging me, just kept saying, just write. And she was just, so many students, I think, were intimidated by her, but to me, she was like just this glowing, joyful person. I had no idea what, I don't know, I saw a totally different person. So those 2 teachers taught me really the basics of art making, I think. So thanks, guys.
Exactly. And so here we have our artists launched, if you will, at a young age. And that's going to launch us into the next area, which I call how they work. So it seems, John and Allie, that you both come into your work with an overall structure and plans, but give yourself the space to generate creative ideas spontaneously and be able to respond to dynamics that are occurring in the moment. So do you think that the structure and the planning actually enable you and free you up enough to then create spontaneously? It seems somewhat paradoxical, but I get the sense from both of you that that's kind of fundamental.
Yeah, absolutely. It does seem paradoxical, but it's true. I think, it's like anything, like, you want your balloon to fly, but you don't want it to fly away. you want it to be tethered so you can enjoy both the groundedness and the loft. And I think creativity works that way. And if you have a plan, you're free to throw the plan away if it's not working or if aspects of it aren't working. So you don't want to hold on too tightly to it. But I am so much more relaxed when I walk in with some sort of game plan, and I can then keep the rehearsal going, moving. Okay, great. Let's not dwell too much on this one thing because we've got a bigger picture to address. All that whole aspect. And I've tried situations where I've been completely open, and I just find myself floundering and overthinking, and because it's like you feel like, well, I can't move on until this one moment's perfect because I don't know what I'm doing, and then you're futzing over this one moment and it's not exciting you, and it's like, well, it's not exciting you because we're drilling it to death in a rehearsal, and people aren't performing it to their fullest, so it's like you gotta just keep going. I will say one, talk about great influences. One of the choreographers who I loved working with, who I feel I learned a lot of choreography from, aspects and tools of choreography, is Doug Verone. And I just remember being in rehearsal with him, and he would kind of mumble these ideas to himself, but I quickly latched onto them. And one was like, just make a mess. Just make the mess and you'll clean it up later.
Totally.
He would say, make a mess, clean it up later. And I think that's what it was. It's like, I don't know if he had a game plan or not, but his sort of, what I took from that is just keep going and you'll have the time to refine later. So I think you need to have some way to move forward, either a plan or just a drive to make a mess.
Yeah. I see. And you mentioned like it's an anxiety-driven thing if you don't have something to latch onto. And for me, that structure is like the anchor in a way. So I can let the boat fly away as it wants to from the moor, but I know that I'm like still anchored there. It's also, it holds space for me having structure. I can delve as deeply as I want into this one moment because I know that what I've created for myself within the construct of what we'll be doing that day or that month or that week or that production process, whatever the case may be, that's being held for me. That is already accounted for. Right now, I now have the availability of all of my faculties and my spirit and all of everything to go deep right now on this one thing. And then also having the wherewithal of when how we just beat with the stick, like when do we put the stick down and like move on, but being able to know that I can trust that I have a time tested process that does change, it is fluid, but I can like go, okay, that's over there now, holding space, everything's intact, let's go deep right now. And so for me too, it's that anchor. and it relieves anxiety, you know, and it is fluid. It has to be, because I mean, if you're only going to go one way and not steer off of that, that's when you completely miss, you know, magic. So you also have to have that openness, and having the anchor there allows you to also be open as you go deep. So,
and therein again lies the paradox.
yeah,
That you have to have. Now, after working in your respective genres for many, many years, both of you have amassed a pretty impressive toolkit of approaches that you can draw from when faced with challenges with work with your dancers or work with your actors. And maybe this is somewhat along the same lines of what we've just discussed, but does that give you a solid foundation under you and trust that things are going to be okay? That you're going to be able to handle pretty much anything that you encounter?
Do I really believe that?
Yes, exactly.
Do we actually believe it, or do we trust that we can believe in that?
I mean,
Right.
do these toolkits essentially function as the drivers of that trust? I've done this many times before.
Yeah.
I've utilized all of these.
Yeah, I think I yes. I mean, yes.
This sounds like a qualified yes.
What immediately comes to mind are all the moments where you do panic and you doubt, and I mean, for me, you know, that's what comes up. So let's talk about the yes for a minute. Yes, like I agree to projects, or I delve into projects because at least part of me knows I have the tools and the wherewithal to complete the project. However, I will say, what, you know, is great about making art, and at the same time what is so scary, is that I think all artists do this. You're constantly trying to push yourself and do some things a little differently this time, and let's see if I can, you know, push this envelope this way, or here I am going to try something brand new. I've used those same tools over and over again. I don't want to use them again. And so that can either, you know, that can take you into beautiful new directions, or it can just be a total cluster, you know, clusterness. Yes. And then you kind of have to go, all right, reel it back, pull out those tools. And that's where the tools really are what they are. It's like, it is okay, I've made a mess. I'm gonna need some of my tools to clean this up. So yeah, and yes, I should always trust that those tools are there for me, and I'm not copping out or anything weird like that by using them.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
I work with kids, obviously. So,
Say no more, right?
The tools that I need definitely come into play, because I'm differentiating all the time. So I can't even just use one tool most days, or even most moments. You know what I mean? I have this happening for this kid, this one, and this one's just making sure that one's like staying in the room. So, you know, there's a lot going on for me with regard to, you know, do I rely on my tools? I'm completely dependent on them. But I also really love when I've picked up a new one and didn't even know where it came from, and that's often a spontaneous thing. So, yeah, I trust the tools. I know that they work. Sometimes too, working with kids, it's different with adults, but working with kids, you rely on those tools in tandem with the structure, almost like, when we're doing this, I'm going to use this. When we're doing this, I'm going to. Is there variance from that? Of course there is. But I absolutely, in the back of my mind, I'm almost always like, what am I doing right now? What can I pull up right now? Because it's like that. Working with adults, a little bit different. The expectation is different, too. So it might not be so formulaic in a way. There's more freedom in a way. But not that there's not freedom with kids. I mean, working with kids is kind of like, that's what it is in a lot of ways too. But yeah, I definitely do trust that toolbox. I trust that it's going to be there for me. And as a teacher of kids, I'm demonstrating the use of what I have within and pulling up what I have and believing that I have something that I can fall back into that will catch me and catch them. So,
Well, it's interesting because later on, I think we'll get into some topics where self-doubt does surface. Toolkits notwithstanding, and I think you really alluded to that, John, so you gave a little preview of what's to come. But
foreshadowing, that is also a tool.
right, which you learned early on. Now, working collaboratively is a hallmark of both Allie and Jonathan's process. What about your respective approaches do you think makes you successful as a collaborator and makes you successful at facilitating collaboration among your students and among your dancers?
That's a good question. I think, for me, it's really creating an environment that allows for collaboration. It's sort of stereotypical to think of a dance rehearsal where the choreographer is just dictating steps and barking out direction. But I don't enjoy that environment so much. It's certainly fine. I've done it and I've been in it, but I think my work is so emotionally driven and psychologically driven that I want the dancers to be much more invested in the work as people and bringing their own experiences to the work, much the way an actor would. And that's not always asked of dancers necessarily. Sometimes it absolutely is, sometimes it's not. And so, and I think there needs to be talking about a safe space and a safety. There needs to be safety in the room, so the dancers can be vulnerable with their emotions and their personal thoughts and their memories and things like that. So, I think that's the way I'm most collaborative. I don't always think of myself as a collaborative artist in the sense that what I literally create, the choreography, is 90% my own, it comes from me, but as opposed to a lot of other wonderful choreographers will say, hey, can you make up a phrase there, and then I'm going to patchwork it in, and where the dancers are literally creating steps, or you're collaborating with a musician who's composing the music. I have experience in that, but that's not my general MO. But I think what is very collaborative is, again, the direction and drawing the performance out of my dancers.
Is that similar in the theater?
I would say, well, I'm sure you have a person who came up with the idea of a play, and like what you're describing, it came from them, it came from inside, but it cannot come to life without the contribution of all of these other artists. I mean, you can have a one-person show, and that's fine, but they're going to be sitting in the dark in an empty space if we don't get more people involved. Right. But again, for me working with kids and stuff, once again, it comes back to modeling and creating an understanding of how do we even work with people, let alone creating a piece of art, which can get very messy very quickly if we're not on the same page. So a lot of it for me with regard to collaboration has to do with teaching how to communicate and teaching how to share a vision and add to it, have to take away from it, with respect and an understanding that not every idea can remain intact, but we find, we prune to kind of let this thing grow the way that it needs to, And again, for my students, no matter what they end up doing, whether they stay in an artistic field or branch out, these tools are priceless. It's going to come into play no matter what they choose to do. So I look at it from my perspective in the work that I do regarding collaboration. It's a life skill that I'm helping them to build and formulate. And I don't want them, from an artistic perspective, to think that this stuff needs to or is better or worse when created in a vacuum. You know, a lot of times ego falls into the arena, and that's fine. We can love our idea. We can think it's fantastic. We can feel huge because of our idea. But your ego can also, eliminate your ability to see past your own vision, to include other people's contributions to make it even that much better. So all of those kind of ideas, I try to teach in addition to the actual, how do we physically, move a set piece together. It really all kind of comes into play. So it's huge. It's a huge factor of what I do.
Absolutely. And maybe the next question, I think, John, you started to shade into it, and perhaps they're really parallel or intersecting, I should say, which is that I wonder how you both create the actual environments where it is safe to make mistakes. It's safe to experiment. It's safe to explore one's own personal ideas and path.
Well, sort of like what Allie said about modeling, for me, it's being vulnerable myself. If I'm standing there all grouchy and closed off, nobody's going to want to then pour their heart out to me, so I need to be open. And then I need to encourage them to share with me their ideas. And it could be an idea about how a step is executed. It could be an idea about what step comes next, or emotionally what's going on for their character, psychologically what might come next. I think language and again, like I said, in dance, you might go through a dance process where none of those things are talked about, where it is very much abstract and just about the movement. But I need to then make it clear, no, I want emotion to be a part of this. I want a through line, a thought through line to be a part of what we're doing.
Right.
And then the dancers go, oh, okay, great. Well, then now that you've welcomed that, I can speak into that. But sometimes if it's not asked, they don't think to contribute it, or So you do have to ask for things, and set up expectations.
So it's pretty proactive on your part.
Yeah. And also in in selecting who you work with, you sort of when you're auditioning people or you're watching them dance and you're kind of deciding, oh, is that someone I can work with? You'll sort of get a feel for how much of what you want they naturally put out. And it doesn't mean that someone who's closed off in that area can't open up, but you're like, okay, well, I'm going to have to get them to open up. Do I have the time for that? Do I want to do that?
Right.
Or do I just have to grab people that I know are just going to give me those ideas that I need? And, very often if you're picking a company, you're going to want people that are ripe with the type of ideas that you want.
Right. Exactly.
It just makes everything flow better.
I look at it a lot as you need clay to mold. So for my kids, and again, we don't have auditions in our club. We invite everybody. I've worked certainly under these circumstances where yes, you're looking for specific qualities to will enrich the whole entire process. But in the context that I work at my program, who you have is who you get, and boy, oh boy, you're going to get everything, which is a beautiful thing too. So I often, in terms of creating this environment, we take away the stigma of making mistakes. It's not a failure. This is how we find our our strengths is a lot of times when we fall flat on our face because we realize, oh, we're gonna get up again. Okay, wow, I either am not gonna do that again, like, or you're gonna bend and twist and tweak it till it is gonna work for us. And we draw out all of the skill and the talent that we can and go big, because when you have kids, especially kids that are going to maybe be fresh, young, green, and intimidated, they're not going to want to necessarily stretch themselves. So you create a playful environment where there are no wrong answers. And then we can say, see, now we have something to work with. Now let's pull this back. Let's tweak this body shape. Let's bring out the vocal quality in this way. But we have to have something to start with. So a lot of what I do to create that space is to create an absolutely playful environment, but with a goal in mind. Like today we're gonna create this kind of, characterization. What can we do to make that come alive? And then we mold it from there, but always under the impression that there are no mistakes. We make discoveries with our mistakes, and that's okay, and it's a support. It's about support. These are kids, we're gonna be making mistakes, and that's okay. That's how we learn.
Exactly.
And demonstrate that yourself. I will share stories of, completely flubbing a line, but I pulled something else out and it worked. It wasn't perfect. I don't think Shakespeare would have been too psyched about that, but I think he actually would have, based on what the scene was.
Yes.
So, and it's okay. So you use yourself as an example, you humanize it, you destigmatize it, and you empower them with the fact that falling on your face means you're just going to get up again and you'll be stronger. You'll have learned something from that. So.
Well, interestingly, maybe a piece of this also, as I'm thinking, helps us segue into the next question, which is, what are your philosophies and approaches about giving feedback to your dancers and feedback to your actors? And that can be a dicey proposition.
Yeah. Well, similar to there are no mistakes, I think I'm a big fan of positive coaching. And what I sort of learned by experience in my own dance career was that when people told me what not to do, it closed off way more doors than were ever intended. Because then you're like trying to figure out how to do this phrase or this movement or get through this whole section of a dance without doing that thing. And suddenly you pull in so much, as opposed to when someone tells you what to do, then that opens doors. And directors that were constantly saying, no, don't do that, it just, I could see it, I could feel it in myself, and I could see it in the other dancers. I was like, everybody's shutting down. And their technique's getting bad, and their dancing is stiff, and their emotions are getting all closed in, and because you're constantly second guessing yourself. And I do not want that. I don't want that at all. And I'm sure some people thrive in that environment, but because they know how to handle that. I didn't. So sometimes I have to keep silent with something, with a correction I want to give, because I'm like, all I can think of is to tell them what not to do. I'm just going to be quiet for a minute and try and think about what they should be doing and see if I can articulate that. So I always try and have it be a positive thing.
I like that. Sort of on the flip side, but only in the sense that we use analyze, critique, compliment, right, with my kids. So if we're doing some scene work, we're all looking for some sort of an intention that's happening within that, whether it's characterization, plot based, whatever. So all the kids are thinking in that line as they're watching, and then we go into what did we see, what did we do, how did they do it, blah, blah, blah. And then we go into critique. And so we say, well, and it's always after, it's not prior. So hopefully we're not closing things off. It's more of a reflective process for the younger kids.
Right.
So we do critique, and the kids learn how to give criticism in a respectful and enriching and constructive way. And they also learn how to take it. So for me, in the role that I play regarding philosophy and feedback, That's kind of how I do it. I have them do it. I model it, but I also have them learn how to do it and experience it themselves, you know. And because they're kids and we want to end on a positive, we do always end with compliment. I think it's just nice. Regardless, you want to walk away feeling stronger and having resilience there and a reconnection. You know, from where maybe you had been criticized for something, so you start to shrink back, you know, and you start, well, I tried this thing and it didn't work, you know, we don't want to have any of that happening. So then we say, oh, but when this happened, oh, okay, and then we open up again. So when we're finished with that experience for that group of kids on the stage at that moment, they're walking away open rather than closed. So that's kind of my approach in terms of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. In my choreography classes, both that I have taken and that I teach, that's where we analyze how we critique a lot more, and there is a structure for critiquing in those classes, and it's very similar. We don't always compliment at the end. I'm going to try and put that one in, but absolutely, like you can't hold back the criticisms, and you need to learn what criticisms really are for, and what people intend. And I always ran into the issue of students just sugarcoating everything because they don't want to insult their friends. And we would really have to be like, you gotta tell them. You gotta tell them what you see, and you gotta tell them what you think. So the more we had a structure for that, the better the conversations were. Sure. And people aren't, you know, again, you can't help if people take some personal offense to it, but it's always with the understanding that it's about the work. It's about, you know, it's about what we're seeing in the moment. How you did it 10 minutes before the class may have been astounding, but what we just saw, these are the raw facts.
Right.
But I do think that critique is different than critique still is well-rounded and positive ultimately. I think a negative direction is really that's just a nasty bite. And it can come from all sorts of reasons, but and I think it's ubiquitous still. But I think there's a big movement to come away from that. I don't think it's just us. I think it's the way the industry is going, which I'm delighted by. But it's still I think that sort of negativity can creep in pretty quickly, and it's up to people like us to change that and to set the tone, sort of bringing it back to how do you create that environment. It's like as leaders of the room, you then say, okay, well, no, this is the mode of communication we're going to be using, and this is how we're going to be talking to each other.
And I'm strict with that. I'm like very strict with that. If we ever have an issue, and it might not even be in a formal, compliment critique situation, it's just something I've overheard, where I see a kid that looks really dejected, and I'm like, no one should look dejected. What's happening? So we address that stuff real quick, and we nip that in the bud, you know. And working with adults or college age, it's almost like that would just be the expectation upon walking in the room, So I don't even know, like, I would just be like shocked and ghastly surprised, like if adults were treating each other that way. But maybe I'm working with kids too long. Maybe adults just treat each other that way. I have no idea. John. But I do feel, like you said, we really, especially in the world of entertainment, if I could do anything at all to like put positivity and lift each other up, as like the energetic realm or whatever I can add to that and make it more positive, then I feel like super lucky to be able to do that, and I feel responsible to do that, so
Well, I wonder how, given the atmospheres you have described attempting to create when you work, you both encourage your dancers and actors to develop as individuals, even though you know that they need to function as an integral part of a cohesive ensemble. Yeah. And you talk about wanting your dancers and actors to discover knowledge and to find their own way to connect to their character and to the work. So why is this important, this individual development, and then how do you balance individual development and ensemble development?
Well, why is it important? Well, doesn't it just sound like better, happy lives for everyone? But I suppose the more, egocentric artist side of me is saying, well, it just makes the work better. Life is art and art is life. And if you really have your performers bringing their whole selves to a role, that role is going to be far richer. It's going to be a far richer experience for the audience. If the ensemble is interacting in a rich way, the audience will experience that and feel that and see that. So we're trying to, the stage is a little microcosm for life, right? And that's not just steps or words from a script. That's the nuance. It's the energy. It's how people react to each other on stage. It's all the body language that's very subtle and impromptu and in the moment. It's not, and that comes from the chemistry among the ensemble.
Yeah, and I agree with everything, and the converse of that is evident as well. You see when that work has not been done. You see those few members of your cast or your troupe or whomever, wow, they really didn't get this down. Or they really didn't delve deep enough into the history of their own character, because I don't believe that family's a family. Things like that. It's evident when the individual work is not done. It really permeates through the work as a whole. So
they're really inextricably linked,
yeah,
right? When all is said and done.
Ideally, I would say, yes.
Yeah.
You don't always get that. And then you go to the other members who did the work and you say, lift them up somehow.
Yeah.
You have a little heart-to-heart in the wings. So, yeah.
Well, believe it or not, the time flew with our first video cast with this roundtable. We will continue in our next one to speak some more about the ways in which Allie and John work. And stay tuned, because right after that, we're going to delve deeply into the way that they deal with psychological and contextual challenges. So that's up next. I'm going to rope them both here so they can't leave and run out on us at this point. So thank you so much for being with us. John, Allie, thank you for participating, and stay tuned for part 2.
Thank you.
Have a good night.